Welcome to the Insum Insider.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Inside. This is the Insum Insider, your source for Oracle Apex tips, techniques, methodology, and really wherever that discussion takes us. I'm your host, Monty Lachele, coming to you from an undisclosed location inside the Beltway of Houston, Texas. We are on the road today. Michelle Scamé has the day off, so flying right seat with me today is my good friend and the ruggedly handsome Francis Mignot. Hello, Francis.
Hi, Monty. How are you?
At the helm, keeping us on time and task, is our producer, French-Canadian, Mark Rule.
Hi, everyone, and welcome.
It's Thursday, May 21st, and thank you for spending a piece of your afternoon with us, coming to you through the miracle of Zoom. We're 5 weeks into this experiment, and we've covered productivity tools, deployments, both in English and in Spanish. We've covered code review, third-party design libraries, and today we're going to discuss forms to Apex tooling. Let me remind everyone that the main reason we're doing this is we miss the interaction we've come to enjoy at the various conferences when we can meet face-to-face. If you've made it this far, you've registered through the Insum Insider site. That's where you can reference previous week's topics. There's also the Insum Insider forum, where we end up each week following the live stream, and where we will end up today. Francis, forms to Apex is a pretty popular topic these days. We did a webinar on this very topic back the first of the year, and with all the events of COVID, that seems like an eternity ago, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, man, it's incredible, huh? But yeah, we feel like this year it's been a lot of requests and questions around the forms to Apex and how that works. So I think a lot of people are interested in finding out the different options, and I think today is going to be a good discussion around that topic.
Yeah, and it's a slightly different format. I guess you could say a very different format from what we did back at the first of the year, because these we're very accustomed to giving these technical sessions, and a lot of them are driven by a slide deck, and there's just kind of an accepted way of kind of presenting some of these technical topics. Today we're going to do it a little differently on the Insum Insider. We're going to have, think of it as a hallway conversation where you're kind of eavesdropping in on a conversation we're going to have with the Oracle product manager, someone we all know, David Peake. In fact, Francis, let's just bring him on right now if you're okay with that. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Monty. Staying safe.
Well, welcome to the Insum Insider. We're thrilled you were able to join us. We usually find you everywhere we find Apex. We find you with the quarantine and all that going on. How's things been?
Well, not a lot of conferences, which I know a lot of people love to come to the conferences. We certainly, as a team, love to get out there and listen to all the great success stories that our customers are having, and learn about some of their trials and tribulations and understand ways we can do things better. So we certainly miss that aspect of it. I mean, we did with Adrian and
Martin.
Sorry?
And Martin, right?
Martin, yep. We did the 24-hour. Yeah. And I mean, that was a huge success. And thank you for having me today. I think, always love to talk about forms and forms to Apex.
Yep. Yeah, it is.
The do's and the don'ts.
Very popular. And, when you've done it, as long as you have too, David, you get pretty strong opinions about what works and what doesn't work. I mean, we've tried a lot of different approaches. At this stage in the game, we can tell you, what these best practices are. We can even provide a bit of a roadmap to say, look, if you want to go from here to there, this is how you get there. But
before we go a bit further, I just want to make sure that people that are online, I see there's a lot of people online, please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate. We want this to be a dynamic discussion. So Mark will bring a question as we speak or as we go along. But if you have any questions or things you would like us to talk about, anything related to forms and Apex, don't hesitate. Go on the Q&A thing on the Zoom, and then you can ask your questions there.
Francis, Michelle would have been proud. Did
you see my shirt? I have my hooked on Apex shirt today. You see?
Yes,
nice, huh?
I expect you to fly the colors. That's
now that we don't go to conferences, I'm not gonna get new T-shirts anymore. I'll have to wear this one for another year, man.
Oh, the travesty.
Yeah, first world problem. So, David, I mentioned that there seems to be ever increasing popularity with Apex. Certainly, when it comes to working with forms and extending what you're doing currently with your forms environment. Why is it so popular, and why does it continue to gain popularity with the forms developers?
I think there's a few different reasons. Forms has been around for a long time, and it's a very solid product. It's been proven. People have had a lot of success with it, but there is some limitations. It's not designed to be a web application. It's not responsive. You have to do quite a lot of work to make it work, on non-desktop devices and that sort of thing. I think that's one of the big reasons. I think another one is trying to get forms developers. If you've got young kids coming out of college, they don't want to do forms. Forms is not sexy. And so, you find with a lot of companies that the people that are still working on forms have been there for a long time, like myself, getting a lot of gray hairs and that sort of thing. And so
but David,
I think it's a skill shortage as much as anything. Trying to find good forms developers is hard.
But doesn't that add to, because I don't disagree with
Hang on, I thought you said you were going to be quiet.
I lied.
Sorry, Monty.
I lied. But what I was going to say is that probably adds greatly to the productivity of a forms developer, because they are in most cases quite experienced, and so someone that's an end user with a forms application is probably just pounding 10 keys out, and it's something that when you've done something for so long, you become, even if it's kind of cumbersome, if you've done it for so many years, you become quite proficient at it. I think where I'm going with this, David, is that as you want to bring in new developers and new users, you need to reduce that amount of training required. And some of these forms apps and some of the development requires much more training.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these apps have been running for 20 years, and the developers don't know the code. They certainly don't know all the code. They know some of it because they've had to go and fix some bugs and do a little enhancement here and a little bit here. But often the people that originally designed the app are long gone. The way that they designed the application initially was designed based on what forms made it easy for them to do. And so, classic example of, an order management system. Well, we're going to go and find your order first, and then we're going to find the customer associated with it. Well, that was great then, but now you want to find the customer first rather than the order. So there's reasons like that. But you touched on one thing that I think is one of the biggest single issues with any modernization project is the power users that have been using the system for 15 years. One of the things is they're ultra fast and productive with how they use the application because they know it inside out.
Yes.
They know all the function keys. They know how to go, and there might be 5 menus that they've got to go through. They know them all inside out. And when you try and introduce anything new, they talk about the number of clicks, and they come up back with a click count. It's like, well, it takes me 7 clicks to do it with the new system. It only took me 5 clicks with the old system. That's 2 more clicks. Well, that's at least an extra, 5 seconds with every time I've got to do this. And it's actually one of the things that you've got to address very early.
Oh
if
yeah.
you are looking at one of these projects, is getting those power users and saying, okay, it's going to be different. But let me show you some of the key benefits of the new system. And actually you have to sell it to them and sell them things like interactive reports and the fact that you can link straight from here to there that you could never dream of doing before. And so some of the ways that they can have a better and more streamlined business process is what you've got to make sure, and it's got to look good and it's got to be ultra intuitive. So, how much training is required for a new user that comes into your organization? If you've got a forms app, you've got to train them up on how to use forms, how to navigate around before you even start talking about the business. And they're slow to start with. It takes them months and months to become productive.
And I think that's a very important point, is that, and we've seen it with every project we did where there was forms involved, is that you need that change management right from the start of the project. Sit down with the users, sit down with everybody at least, and show them, and then even maybe start with a small proof of concept where they get a taste of it and they see, what it does.
There's nothing like that look on their eyes when they're like, oh, we can do this. Oh, when can we have the next bit? And that's when you know that the end users are on board. But that will take some time, and you've got to be aware that they will keep pushing you to make it look exactly the same as the old one and to have exactly the same function keys and functionality, because they're so used to doing that. And that's why they're so productive. And that's the worst possible thing you can do.
Well, you mentioned intuitiveness, and I remember the last time Larry Ellison was in the Insum booth, he provided one of my favorite quotes. And what he said was, we should be developing apps that look like Facebook. And he didn't mean that literally. What he meant was, it doesn't require any training. You sit in front of it and you can put your grandma in front of a Facebook app and she's going to intuitively go here, go there. And I think that's a huge reason why, tools like Apex are gaining in popularity. They just don't require the training.
Yeah, a 7-year-old and a 70-year-old should be able to sit down with your application and enter an order, if that's what your business function is. They shouldn't have to be told that they need to hit this function key, then type in some stuff, then hit another function key, then do and then hit the next. Okay, now you can do that. It should be, here's a screen. Okay, go and find the customer. They should be able to do that without you giving them instructions. And with a lot of old form systems, they are very much like that. And I'm talking predominantly about the old form systems that have been, they may have been upgraded multiple times, but they're still basically the same system that was built 10 plus years ago. Yeah,
that's an important distinction too, because I'm good friends with people in the like Mike Ferrante, the Forms PM, great guy, love Mike, and they continue to make some nice advancements on the product. What we're really talking about are some of these ancient Forms installations that are out there, and that's whenever you've seen turnover of the staff. You get in there and you just go, God, this hasn't been maintained in 20 years, whatever. And so there's some things that we can do to bring those people up and then to provide them some additional functionality. But the older these systems are, the less we're able to just continue to apply Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid.
So talking about functionality, I get often the question, is there anything Apex cannot do that Forms can? Is there, I get this a lot. A lot of people tells me, well, I'm doing this in Forms. It's very complicated. I don't think Apex can do it. So what would be your answer on that, David? What's your take on this?
Well, certainly Forms is basically, a client server tool back at its roots. And so it can do things on the desktop that web applications can't. And it's not Apex, it's web applications in general. So, whenever you're talking primarily about a client-based tool against a web-based tool, then it's those sort of interactions directly with the desktop that, web applications aren't as attuned to doing. That being said, a common use case is things like a barcode scanner. You know, we need to be able to scan something. Well, guess what? You go and do a Google search. There's plenty of solutions out there with Apex doing barcode scanning.
Yeah.
You know, if you need to do things on your phone, then, you know, there's things like PhoneGap that you can extend with. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can, you know, get web applications to do more. And it's the delta is getting smaller and smaller, you know, as HTML's extending its
JavaScript helps a
capabilities,
lot, right?
and JavaScript,
Node.js,
etc.
JavaScript.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember years ago talking with the ADF crowd, and what they said was, you know, we can do thick client, and you can't do thick client. But that's changed over time, where we can add more and more to the client, like you said, with the JavaScript, and you're right. The delta's decreasing greatly. Let's, you know, I want to get us onto the topic of tooling, because, you know, I think we've covered some of the basics. We've set the table. We said, you know, these are the reasons why Apex is popular and is continuing to gain popularity in the space. But what about tooling? There's the migration assistant. Is that something that is actively being developed, promoted within the Apex team? As I know, I'm gonna pose that question to you first, David, but then I know Francis wants to talk about some of the proprietary tooling that we've developed as well.
Sure. So, I mean, several releases ago now, and I think it was like 5.1. I can't remember exactly when, we actually removed the capability to generate an application from our project. So basically, you know, at a high level, you take your forms, you convert them from the FMBs to XML files so that you can upload them into our project. And we used to have an ability to, you know, generate a first cut. And we removed that. And the reason we did was it really didn't generate a very good application. And since then, we've gone, you know, so far more advanced with what we can do with our Create Application Wizard, with Create Page Wizard, etc. But one of the key things that I think anybody that's undertaking a modernization from Forms to Apex needs to understand is they need to understand the business rules that are buried in the triggers within Forms, right? That's primarily the objective of that project is, I don't need to be a Forms developer. I need to be able to run some, and in fact, in Forms 12c, it's actually built in now that you can extract out the XML file directly from the tool now.
Well, I like that.
I need to be able to get the XML file loaded up and then be able to review the triggers and be able to say, yeah, I know enough about what that's trying to do. Don't care about that one. Oh, hang on, that one I do care about. I mean, one of my favorite stories was a customer that did all this great Forms modernization. They had a brilliant looking app, and it was actually for, you know, they sat the power users down that were very reluctant. And the first day, one of the users went in, was entering in a person, entering in a birth date, and they entered it in for tomorrow. And the end user's like, the system's crap. It doesn't even prevent me from putting in a birthday of tomorrow. You know, and it was a simple little business rule that was in the Forms application that they'd forgotten to put into the new application. That's really what that project's about, is to make sure that you know what business logic is in the old app without having to go through potentially hundreds of forms and, you know, thousands of triggers trying to find the ones that are important to you. And so that's really what it's about, is you don't want to regress your application. You want it to be better, not have, you know, introduce old bugs that were fixed 10 years ago and say, oh, here's this great new application. Oops.
Yeah, nothing's going to fall. You can't allow anything to fall within the cracks. So even if everything doesn't need to go to the new app, at least it's been addressed and identified as, you know, no longer applicable or whatever.
Yeah, and for those bits that are, you can say, okay, you know, Fred, go do it as a trigger, do as a trigger in the table maybe, or call some function, or, you know, do a dynamic action, a process, whatever's required. But at least now you know that functionality needs to be, you know, allowed or implemented in the new system. So,
I agree
We're
100%
not
with what
doing,
you're
sorry,
saying.
sorry, Francis, one
That's
last thing.
fine.
We're not doing a lot of development in that area. It still uploads XML files, still does the same thing, but we're certainly not looking to remove it either. I think it has value as it is.
Any plans to upgrade it or anything, or add features to it, or?
What sort of features? I mean, if people have ideas for new features, and let us know. It's not something we're concentrating on. We think it does what it needs to do, and we're not trying to be all things to all people. We're just trying to help to identify business logic so it doesn't get lost in the translation. So for that purpose, I think it works very well. And as I said, we're open to new ideas of things that might be useful, but we're not looking to do much at this stage.
So what you were saying about the generation versus, again, looking at the code and everything, I think you're 100% with you on that. We've seen it a lot. I mean, a lot of people thinks that the generation should be automated and then generate thing. But if you think about it, Apex by itself is a rad tool. So just generating apps is quite fast, right?
Well, the other thing is it comes back to it shouldn't look like the old app and it shouldn't act like the same app. If you try and regenerate the same app, guess what you're trying to do? Reproduce the same thing. You should really if you're doing, major redevelopment, you should really take a step back and look at, is that the way the business still wants to run their business? Because just because that's the way it was designed 20 years ago, doesn't mean that's really the way that is the most efficient way for them to go from, to solve that particular business problem.
Exactly.
And so that's why it's better to, here's my data structures, start with a clean slate and actually design it in today's terms rather than yesterday's terms.
Yeah, and that's another good point. I mean, going to Apex instead of other tools, I think it makes a lot of sense because you keep the database, your data model, which is probably very good after so many years. You can
Hopefully.
keep, logic, triggers, stuff, you keep everything. They just change basically the UI and then get it more modern, right?
The other key thing, you can keep the developers.
Yeah.
Because forms developers, what are they very skilled at? SQL, PL SQL, database first development, building from the database objects up, using a declarative environment. What's Apex? All of those same things, right? I mean, if you try and take a forms developer and say, oh, you're going to do object-oriented development where you've got to think about the UI first and don't worry about what's at the bottom. You've got to think about UI first and all that sort of thing. They're like, huh? Hang on a minute. That's yeah, okay. I sort of understand what you mean, but really, it's quite foreign to them. And so that who knows the current application the best? The current developers. So you want to maximize their ability to get into the new tool as well. And that's, I think, one of the biggest advantages of Apex over anything else is its similarities. So that, I trained up many forms developers when I was on a project for 4 years at a local law enforcement agency where we migrated all of their forms to Apex, and most of them were productive in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. If really I was productive to try and get into Java or, object-oriented language, I don't know how productive I'll be inside of 6 months.
Yeah, David, are you familiar with some of the tooling that we've developed here in house?
I have no idea whatsoever. I mean, I know you've got some tooling, and I know you can do some really cool stuff, but please tell me about it.
Yeah,
gentlemen, sorry, if I may interrupt, gentlemen, it's Mark. I just wanted to let you know we have a few questions, 2 questions specifically, if perhaps we should field them before going into the next section.
Okay.
All right. So the first one is we have forms application as health information system, about 500 forms from simple to very complicated. We can't develop all forms in Apex. Can you suggest an environment where we can use Apex and forms simultaneously? We could develop Apex pages on some processes that customers request, and the rest functions should be for sometimes in forms. Well, and a follow-up to that question is, please, can you suggest some documents that cover such configurations?
So we're going to talk about our spectrum that we call.
Yes.
internally at Insum. We call it the spectrum for forms modernization in a second, and then we'll cover partial migrations or conversions to full conversions. But
Right.
And
And
Mark, that last question, let's hold it for further in the discussion because that's going to get down into the weeds a little bit. So
Sure.
that last question by Ari, let's
no
get
problem.
back to that one in a second.
were those the two questions you had, Mark?
Yeah, those are the only ones so far. But
Okay.
I encourage everyone to ask as many as you want.
Yeah, again, don't hesitate. So I was going to talk a bit about our tooling because we also get a lot of questions around that. So what we've done is we kind of started with the same mindset as your tooling that you have in Apex, and then we kind of boosted up a bit because doing a couple of manual conversions, we saw that we spend a lot of time opening forms, opening Apex, and going back and forth and building specs or cards in Jira and all those things. So we wanted to streamline the process of modernizing those forms. And what we've done is that we've built a tool that goes from extracting everything like a bit the Apex tool does, but also identifying anything that is obsolete, like the dead code, for example, that's not called anywhere. Anything that repeats itself, if there's a piece of code in one forms that's been used in 20 other forms, then we're able to see it and then maybe create a package and use one package instead of repeating that all over, and being able to extract that code and then push it down. But we start even a bit before that. After extracting the logic into our tool, we're able to do a first estimate on the effort that it's going to take to modernize all your forms. So we do that a lot also. Sometimes we take hundreds, 500, 6,000 forms. We just upload everything and we run our analysis on that. And then based on different criterias, we're able to give ballpark effort of how much time it's going to take. So it's a complete tool from estimation to analysis, but it doesn't generate. Again, we're a bit in the same mindset where we think once we're into Apex, it's so fast that it's not worth generating.
So it's not a silver bullet? I mean, that's what everyone asks for. Is there a silver bullet? I want Apex up and running tomorrow. I've got 500 forms. I'll give you a couple of weeks. Can you have them all in Apex, please?
We do have an answer for that though, and that is this solution that Francis is going to get to in a bit, where there is a piece of the spectrum. There is a point in the spectrum that does allow you to make immediate improvements and say, look, I want to start using Apex today. Francis will talk about that in just a second.
But it's not a silver bullet tool that will convert everything automatically for you. That doesn't exist, and it's been like that since day one. I don't think, like you said, you're going from a client server approach to a web approach. There's no way you can automatically generate that.
And I think, I'm still a firm believer of, if you take exactly what was in the old application and move it across, all you're doing is replacing the engine underneath. You're not really improving the business. If you're going to be spending time and money, then at the end of the day, you want a better application, not just the same application running better.
Yep.
Well, let's get into that spectrum right away. I think we're into that.
Let's go.
Right?
Hey, Francis, just going to say one thing too is that, well, go ahead. I'll come back to it. Go ahead. Yeah. No. I just don't want to totally derail the conversation any more than I already have. So let's go ahead and talk about.
But I think it's. I think. Let me know if you see.
Okay. While I'm waiting for the screen,
we can see it.
Yeah, we see it.
You see my slide, or you see my presentation?
We're seeing your slide.
Yeah.
Okay. Your presentation, I should say. It's
in
presentation mode.
Okay. Thanks. So we get a lot of this, and then we think at Insum, our approach to forms is that, at first we were all about converting and getting everything from forms to Apex, but that has a lot of issues in some cases we don't have the choice because people are really moving everything to a web technology, and then some clients we do move everything, but most of the time we have like hundreds and hundreds of forms and reports, and it ends up being a huge project. And then even in some cases, forms is still there, still supported for some things. I think it's still good, and you might just want to have a nice dashboards, or maybe you want to have, I don't know, mobile applications or more web services and those type of things that the web application can provide without replacing everything. So our spectrum is going, obviously keeping only forms, but we're more into either and also upgrading to the latest version of forms. That's something we usually do also, just to make sure that we can run both at the same time. But we're mostly on the blended solution, and that's what we were talking about. Is that, and then that's about the question we add also. It's like, can both of them run together? Well, of course, because I'm always saying when I present on forms to Apex, I always say, you're paying for Apex. You have Oracle Forms, you are paying for Oracle Apex. It comes with Forms. It comes with a database, basically. If you have an Oracle database, you have Oracle Forms. So why not use it and use it today? I mean, you have Forms today. You can start using Apex on the same database, same data model, and start building apps today and leverage your data. It doesn't need to be necessarily integrated with single sign-on. That's something we can do. We can integrate it with some single sign-on, make sure your users doesn't have to re-log into Apex and go to your web application. But it doesn't have to do so at first. You can create a separate module and attach it to your existing database. So, and they can live in both in the same exact database, right?
And use the same database objects, all the same packages, same functions,
same
the project I was talking about before.
Same DBA, same everything. I mean, what more can you want?
I mean, the project I was talking about before, we built a system for police officers to do arrests. And we built the system, and it took them 2 years to train up all the police across all the different districts and different, times of day and everything else. So for 2 years, we had both Forms and Apex running side by side. And from our perspective, we didn't care which one they used. Now, obviously, we prefer they used Apex, but at the time, as soon as a user was trained up, they were cut off from using Forms, and they were put in as an Apex user, and they'd start using Apex from that point forward. But for those 2 years, it started off with everyone on Forms, and then it slowly went right the other way to where everyone was on Apex. So, I mean, you bring up a good point. Things like data entry operation, that to me is still, Oracle Forms is one of the best tools for that. Users sitting there with a piece of paper, they're hammering in data, next, turn over the piece of paper. Forms is very well suited to that sort of operation. When you're starting out, doing a proof of concept, those sorts of things are invaluable because the team learns about Apex. If they've got someone like Insum in there helping them, they've got it set up properly. They understand, they start getting trained up and getting comfortable in some sort of simpler Apex pages rather than trying to tackle the most complex Forms page they have first and foremost, and then going, oh, Apex doesn't work. It's like, well, depends on how skilled you are at Apex. The harder the pages and Forms, then it's going to take more effort and more time. No matter how skilled you are at Apex, it's still going to take some time to build those out. So customers really need to start management build.
Earlier, you talked about change management and getting your user. I think this approach also is very good for that. To start small, and we do a lot of our Apex project, no matter what the technology is, but start small and then integrate it and use your data and show your user data in a different way, and then they'll start to get acquainted with the approach of a web technology, and then it's going to flip over, so remove the pain points from the start and then slowly move everybody or everything and keep whatever works. I mean, if it works, it works.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing. If your Forms applications are doing what they need to do and, you don't have issues with them, then you don't have to throw all that away. You can start with net new functionality, mobile, customer facing or partner applications, that sort of thing, are perfect for doing something intuitive rather than forms based. Starting out, as you said, small, but doing some small dashboards and small reporting and that sort of thing is a good way for your end users to understand that, yes, it's going to be different. It doesn't use all the same sort of things, doesn't look the same, but oh my, look at this extra functionality you get.
Yes. And that the power user that you discussed earlier in the call, we find it critically important to involve that power user very early on, because that power user knows where the bodies are buried and knows the warts that exist in the current Forms app, and is going to do a great job of bringing the rest of the rank and file over and saying, hey, this is going to be a positive for us.
Yeah, the other thing is naming things correctly. You don't want to use names that they're unfamiliar with, because then you lose them immediately. And it's the little things that because they're so used to the old system, that will really hamper the new development if you call something an identifier instead of a person number or something, employee number, whatever it be.
Yeah, David, we have a question that I had asked Mark to hold, and you just kind of queued it up. The question is there an efficient way to map the original variables in the form business login to the Apex items? Would you consider not using an Apex naming convention? And that was kind of where you were going, is like, let's make sure that we are kind of consistent with what we're calling things through there, and aid the transition as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, Apex will generate, the Apex Create App Wizard, Create Page Wizards will name things based on your table columns. Now, in Apex, you can go and use, the attribute dictionary and that sort of thing to do some of that. And it depends how many times you're using the same thing. So if you're using the employees on 10 different pages, then it's worthwhile spending some time to make sure all the columns for employees are set up the same, so it's consistent across all of them. If you're only doing, the page on departments once, then okay, you go in there, you spend 5 minutes after you've generated it, get it to be the same your way. But it will actually name all the columns, it'll name all the items based on the table columns, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's actually, you don't want to break from that just because it was done differently in Forms, because it'll make it harder going forward for any developer. One of the key reasons you want to modernize to Apex is so your development's faster and easier. If you start using, funky naming conventions from your old application, you're losing some of that, benefit of the modernization. Don't you agree, Francis?
No, I agree 100% again with you. I'm always agreeing with you, David. That. But
that's why y'all get along so well.
Seriously,
I don't often agree with Monty though.
No, Monty never.
No.
But seriously, no. I think you're right. I think you want to be as close as possible to the standard ways of using Apex for multiple reasons. But maintainability is one of them, and definitely you want to start going on the right path, right? So I agree with that.
Well, the worst case scenarios I've seen is where developers try and implement exact forms functionality, and they spend a huge amount of time trying to replicate some old stuff, some stuff that was in Forms, and it's very hard to maintain. It's very hard to develop and get it right. It's very hard to maintain. And at the end of the day, you're not actually doing your end users any favor, because now you're making it non-intuitive again. Yeah. It's like, ugh.
Yeah, if you go back to the business needs, then you can figure out maybe new ways of doing things, because it evolved since I don't know how many years, but the last 30 years, the way of doing things really changed. So maybe a graph, or maybe, I don't know, something more simpler would work than.
Well, one of the things I think works really well is when you're going through and doing your analysis, is you need a power user that really knows the system. But you're best off, if you can, to get someone that has only been in the company 3-6 months, someone young who knows enough about how the system operates, but isn't wedded to must be done this way, because your power user will keep saying, oh no, we have to do it this way. And you ask them why, and it's like,
because we've always done it this way.
are
And
you
you
a
know
power
what?
user, Monty? You sound just like one.
That's why we
But
call
that
it.
is exactly their answer. So if you can get someone young in that can say, oh yeah, well, and if you can keep getting them back to, look, this has to be really easy for anybody in the organization to use, not just you group of, 20 power users,
Yeah.
then, they start to see it differently.
And that's why we call it modernization now instead of conversion, right? Because you want a more modern interface. You want to use and leverage what's available now and the way of doing things. And you're right. If someone younger people will have this mindset of, oh, how would I do that for in a web environment? What can I leverage better? Or can I link to other things? Can I create web services again, or any other type of things that the web can offer? So I think you need to switch their mindset there.
And again, that's one of the key reasons they want to modernize in the first place. When I first started, if I wanted to take vacation, filled out a piece of paper and put it in the box, and someone in HR entered it in for me. Great. Now everyone does it for themselves.
Yeah.
Well, much of the business that's being done by the forms can be, distributed out amongst the organization or even to customers, partners. And so, the power users sometimes get stuck in that. And if it is an application that's going organization wide, get someone from another organization to come in and help you with the analysis, because they're not wedded to the way it's done, because they just need something that they know how to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
Gentlemen,
what I was going to say earlier was around the analysis is, the tooling that Francis described. It was important that this be a automated cursory analysis of what's in those forms, because if you're dealing with an environment that has 1,000 forms, there's no way that we can go in there and provide full analysis on these forms and get back to that client in 3 days saying this is what your project is going to look like. That takes a lot of effort. So the one of the big benefits of the tooling that we've developed is it goes through there and it really says, okay, this form, it inventories the form, goes through and says, here's all the pieces, all the nuts and bolts of this form. It's going to take this level of effort. It's going to take this many hours for us to come in there and do that. We can do that in an automated cursory manner with the tooling, but there's no substitute for what you said. You got to get in there and get your hands dirty.
And just so we're clear, is that tooling is not something we sell, or it's part of our services. Basically, we use that to automate and be better at doing those modernization. It's not something you can take and just pop in some stuff. It just brings more intelligence or more data to your conversion process and makes it a lot easier, just so you know what you're doing. You're able to figure out everything at once.
So I've got a question for you, because I don't know your tools really much at all. Do you determine what's being used and what's not being used?
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the biggest things with these big old forms applications. There's whole functional areas that get used once every 6 months, but it's a huge chunk of functionality. It's like, well, if it's only being used once every 6 months, then that's very low priority compared to something that's used, 500 times a day.
And we're still working on some improvement, like extracting stuff, and so it's an ongoing thing. But again, it's not the silver bullet either. It's mostly a tool that helps us, being better and analyzing everything.
And we're constantly asked to provide estimates, Francis. When customers approach us, and so we can't provide that estimate 6 months from now. We have to give them an idea, and we can do that with an automated cursory tool that we developed. We say, okay, sure, based on everything, this is how big it is. It's bigger. It's bigger than a breadbasket, smaller than a Buick, kind of thing. That's what that lets us do.
Buicks? What are they?
We all have gray hair, and not you though, huh? Right? But
no, David uses Grecian formula. No, so let's move on just a bit. Now, if someone is interested, let's just say in the blended solution that you described, Francis, that says, I want to start taking advantage of Apex right away. I don't want there to be tremendous, I don't want to wait 6 months or a year. I want to start receiving the benefits now. What's the steps, the concrete steps that they can take in order to start that process?
So there's different things you need to be aware of. So I think the first step is really, like we said, talking to your end users, and I don't know, Monty, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll answer my own question. What it is?
No, but there's different ways of approaching it. I think we have a list of things that actually we go through and make sure that you need to be in control of your project, I think, from the start, and know what you're going from and going to, right? So doing your inventory is probably the first step.
And David mentioned an example of a form running once a year or once every 6 months. So we need to, if it were me, I would say, okay, what forms are currently in use? I may have 300 or 400 forms in my library, in my forms inventory. Maybe 100 of those are never used at all. And then of those, maybe there's 50 of them that are used very, very sparingly. And then there's going to be, 50 that are used 100 times a day by 1,000 people. Those are the ones that are going to have the most impact. So
I think the first step is really doing your inventory, and what exactly do you want to do? I mean, check your forms. Is there any low-hanging fruit you want to take or work on? If you're planning on doing some modernization, maybe looking at what's the best use case you could use. Is there a small module you can start with and then start implementing your UI, your security, and everything else at first? I would not go with the biggest form. A lot of people want to try and start on the biggest one because they want to make make sure that it's going to work. But I think our approach is probably take something a full function or full module that you can take that's not too big to get your hands into it, and then start doing a first pass and then seeing and live it, and get quickly to some kind of real results, production module, and then live it. And then after that, you can tackle bigger ones. So I think that's one. We also have a lot of questions we go through. So what versions of forms, for example, so we talked about maybe you need to upgrade your forms first. Maybe that would be better.
What about how much business logic is in the database as opposed to in the forms? That one's a huge difference maker in how easy or hard it is.
Yep, exactly.
How many users you have? Is there any outside links? Like, are you calling or integrated with other systems? The whole infrastructure part.
But surely the first question should be why? What's your main business driver? Because if they've got an unrealistic reason for doing it, then the chances are they're not going to be successful because of the fact they're not doing it for the right reasons.
Yep.
So I mean, my first thing would be, well, like, why are you looking to modernize? How much are you looking to modernize? Like everything, parts of it, over time, as quickly as possible. And why? It might be that, I've dealt with a number of customers that have got commercial applications and they have to modernize them. They don't have a choice. They have to be able to provide fully responsive applications that run on any device. And, it's a case of, well, we have to, between now and this point, we have to get the new version up. We can't do it in forms. We're doing it in Apex. This is how much time we've got. Those ones are easy. But for many, non-commercial applications, what are your driving points? Like, okay, if you've got end of year in 3 months and you must have X, Y, and Z in place, then maybe you keep it in forms for this year and you worry about it for the next financial year or something. It's like, I think that's where a lot of people try and, as you were saying, try to do the biggest one because, that one we have to do now. It's like, why are you trying to sprint, not even run, but sprint before you can even walk? Let's slow it down a little and and learn what it is, because each
Yeah.
migration or modernization project is special. They're different.
Yeah,
How much
you don't want to
logic's in
put
the
the
triggers?
business
How
at
much?
risk, right?
Yeah.
You don't
How
want to put
much
the business.
weird stuff are they doing?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a question come through about reports
Oh, that's a
and
good one.
about the conversion of reports. I know that's a little bit out of scope, but so many of these forms houses, are paired with Oracle reports. The takeaway here is that you can continue to call Oracle reports from Apex without any issues at all. Do you find, David, that most of the time reporting is in spec or is in scope?
Yeah, I
Out of
mean,
scope.
one of my key things is I think we need to be kinder to the planet. I think we need to stop trying to stop printing nearly as much as we do, like doing high fidelity reports for things like invoices and that sort of thing. Sure, yep. But many people want to print simply because they want a piece of paper, and that's so bad, right? Instead, for many reports, a good dashboard with interactive reports with good charts that they can drill down on and that sort of thing is far more valuable than anything that could be printed out on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So I'm talking primarily or predominantly about high fidelity reporting. So that's one of the key things. Again, 20 years ago, there wasn't good reports online, so everything had to be printed so you could look at it, right? I really think that many of those requirements can be much better met by using reports, charts, etc., that are so easy to do in Apex. There's always going to be there's different tools out there from third-party vendors and some from Oracle. Oracle reports, I don't know what the support lifetime on that is.
It's not. I think
Well, I
it's
think
it's supported, but I think it's isn't it?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. I'm not gonna comment on that. I know, BI Publish is an option, but it's an expensive option if all you want to do is high fidelity reporting. But if you've already got an Oracle Reports license, I have a feeling, but again, don't quote me on this. Speak to your local Oracle sales rep about trying to convert those to BI Publisher licenses potentially.
Yeah.
So what we've seen and on that area is that when you look at it, back in the days when we used to build reports, we would build one report for something, and if you changed some kind of criteria, you would build another one and then another one. So sometimes you end up having 10 reports that does the same thing but then give a different view.
Yep.
So you can replace those now with interactive reports probably, or those type of things that are, like you say, dynamic. So you have access to it. You don't need to print out. You just want to have access to your data.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not to mention everything that you just described, Francis, required requirements, analysis, development. It had that go through that full cycle again. But if you hand somebody an interactive report, you've empowered that user to sit there and customize the report to his taste.
So there are things we can do just bring those into either AOP or BI Publisher or any other kind of tooling out there. I
mean, at the end of the day, there's a SQL query under there somewhere, right? If you can get that SQL query out, then you're 2/3 of the way there to meeting the same requirements.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I would just want to bring in one more question that we haven't covered yet. What is the best way to migrate Oracle Forms built-in functions into Apex?
I'm going to leave that one to you, Francis.
Well, which function are we talking about?
What's the built-in function about? Do you guys know?
I think we need more information to.
Okay.
It may be something that
we need to know what you mean by built-in options or functions.
Built-in functions, yeah.
I wonder if they're talking about some of the function keys and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you're talking about the function keys, the best thing is don't use them. Again, non-intuitive, hard for end users to learn, etc. If you're talking about things like, when you block instance and all those sorts of things, those are just handled differently. And within the Apex documentation, there's a migration guide. And in the appendix in there, we actually have this is what it's called in Forms. This is the equivalent in Apex to sort of give people a bit of an understanding. There's also another chapter while I'm talking about the documentation. I think it's chapter 2, where we talk about the key differences between Forms and Apex. So Forms is doing pessimistic locking. Apex is doing opportunistic locking. And for forms developers, they're used to doing, effectively select for updates. So as soon as that user gets that record, they've locked it. No one else can change it until they release it, because there's a hard connection between the forms and the database. With Apex, it's like any other web. There's no connection. The user might query up a record and then disappear, never come back. And so we can't do any of those select for updates. So forms developers have to understand some of those key differences. And I think it's chapter 2 where we talk about that. So, have a read through that, and that'll get you well along the path of, oh, okay, I've got to think about that a bit differently. But most forms developers should be able to very readily become Apex developers, and it just takes them a bit of time to get used to the new way of doing things,
Yes.
different IDE.
Yes.
There are some differences. Some of these built-ins that gentleman was asking for, many of them just aren't required,
Yes.
because we just handle pages differently and handle, branching and that sort of thing differently to how the old forms did it.
I think that's the whole key there, is like you need to think differently, like you're saying. And we've been doing that for years, like for over 18 years. And we never saw something that could not be done. And that's not because we were replicating the exact built-in functions or the exact functionalities. That you need to go back one step and look, where are you trying to achieve? What's the requirement? What's the business need? And there's always a way of doing so. If you need to communicate to another device, then there's ways of doing so. Not the same way as forms. You need to find out the new way of doing so, or maybe displaying the data differently or approaching that differently. So that's really what we were talking about, changing the mindset or doing the change management or those type of things. You need to think differently. So it doesn't mean that Apex does exactly the same thing as forms does, but it can do at the end of the day, can produce the same results, differently maybe, but there's we haven't seen anything that we couldn't do using Apex, basically, that we're doing.
And gentlemen, we just had one more question that came in, and asks you for best practices for migration, which is highly recommended to analyze the current design and processes when the number of forms is considerable. And it also goes along with another question that we had, asking for any documents or training materials that they could use to help skill up forms developers to understand more Apex, because they have 50 forms developers supporting applications that range from 100 forms to 1,000 forms. So there's a whole aspect of a large amount of forms that are being covered that need to be modernized.
So for those big numbers of forms, we leverage our tooling that we were talking about. With that, we're able to go in and quickly spot, where are the biggest issues, or if we want to drill down or figure out, what we should concentrate on. But really, I think the blended solution is really your best approach. Try Apex first, understand how it works. Go on apexoracle.com, read the documentation, try it out and use it. And then you'll see it's a low-code tool, so you can start being productive right from the start. Maybe get a small team of your forms team to start using it, and then growing your team around Apex. So start small. Start with that. That would be my advice.
And I just put in the chat the link to the hands-on lab. Sorry, Francis.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just put in get your forms developers to just go through those hands-on labs. They're designed for people who know nothing, and they'll slowly build up a little bit of confidence. And as you say, install Apex on-premise in the same database. You don't have to do everything in the cloud. But the beautiful thing about Apex is when you're ready, moving to the cloud is so easy. But in this, you've got an on-premise database, you've got forms in there, install Apex into that database, get going. But have your developers go and sign up on the free or always free autonomous cloud, get a free account, go and play around up there, or go to apex.oracle.com and sign up for a free account there. Go and kick the tires around, just play with it outside of your development environment, then have them come in and do some real work directly against the same database objects. Have them start playing.
Well,
Build out small little screens.
David, on that note, you know, we've used up our allotted time. Francis, you did good flying
Hey,
right seat
thanks.
with me today. You did wonderful.
Again, it was because I have my shirt, my lucky shirt on. That's why.
All right. Well, thanks again, David. Join us next Tuesday when Insum's own Kenny Kalina will be covering some of these same subjects. We're going to talk about forms to Apex migration. Only we're going to do it in Spanish. David will save you a seat on the front row. The downbeat will be at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. rather, Eastern time. You're not going to want to miss that. A week from today, Insum's own Sylvain Martel and Anton Nielsen are going to talk about EBS extensions. Francis, I know that's something you're very passionate about as well.
Yeah, just if I may add, while we're talking about EBS, it's a bit the same as extension in forms using EBS, right? It's kind of the same approach, but it's an interesting topic. Really be there, you see.
Yep, you're not going to want to miss it. And if you're like me, a lot of times you think of these questions right after the broadcast closes. So we're going to have Francis and we're going to have David hanging around the forum for the next 15 minutes or so. If you have some questions that didn't get made.
What's the link for the forum, Monty? Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark. Can you put that in the chat? And that way
it's
we can.
InsumInsider.com.
Yep. We'll get those questions answered. But we do want to thank you both for taking the time with us this afternoon. And thank you all, the thousands online that joined us today. We do appreciate it. And if you have some ideas, some thoughts on some future topics that we can take on, let us know. We're happy to tailor this and season to taste. So thanks again. Mark, any other questions? If otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and move everything to the forum.
Yeah, thanks, David, by the way.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you
other
very
questions.
much for being there.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Sorry, Mark, I cut you there.
No problem. No questions. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
And see you in the forum.
Thank
All
you
right.
now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
You've been listening to the Insum Insider.